This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Luke with tonight's top stories from East Asia. Uncertainties abroad and doubts about demand at home, but confidence still that an official growth target can be reached, are the message from China's top economic officials as they meet in Beijing. Another round of return for Chinese nationals. Chartered flights over the next few days repatriating more than 1,400 rescued from scam centers in Myanmar. A public apology from South Korea's Air Force blaming mistaken coordinates for bombs dropped in a civilian district, injuring several and damaging property. And Japan's 7-9 Holdings announces a raft of measures to fend off a takeover by a Canadian rival, including a $13 billion share buyback and a U.S. IPO.
It's regrettable that hurdles are put up. It's not to the benefit of the people, but we need to cope with that.
DHL's CEO on how freight and cargo lines are coping with escalating tensions over tariffs. And China showcases its new smartphones at the world's biggest mobile technology event in Spain. As the risk of a full-blown trade war with the U.S. looms and amid a sluggish local economy, top Chinese finance and economic officials have put on a bold front, saying the country has ample space in their policy arsenal to deal with the challenges. All those comments made at one of the most highly anticipated events of the two sessions. Now, that is China's most important political meeting of the year. It's just the second time that the chiefs of the central bank, the finance ministry, and state planner, commerce ministry, and securities watchdog have come together to field reporters' questions on the sidelines of the two sessions. Chief Economic Planner Zheng Shanjie says China is adequately prepared to achieve its growth target of about 5%. Now, that's a goal some analysts have described as ambitious.
那么我们也关注到呢，现在外部环境的不确定性在进一步的增加，同时我们也面临着一些国内需求不足、部分行业、部分企业生产经营这个困难等等这些问题吧。但我们觉得这些困难和挑战都是前进中、发展中的一些困难和问题，都是能够克服和能够解决的。综合分析，我们制度有优势。 市场有潜力，企业有活力，更重要的是我们有直面这些风险挑战的勇气，有解决问题的底气。所以今年实现5%左右的目标，有基础、有支撑、有保障，我们对此充满了信心。
On the fiscal front, Finance Minister Lan Fuan hinted that further stimulus could be on the cards amid the risk of a trade war with the United States. The veteran official said China's 2025 fiscal deficit target of 4% indicates the government's willingness to provide even stronger support for the economy.
一方面，在实施好存量政策上下功夫。 抓好去年4季度出台的一篮子政策落地见效，确保政策效应在今年持续有效的释放。另一方面呢，在谋划好增量政策上出实招，用好用足政策空间。在这里啊，我还要补充一点，为应对内外部可能 出现的不确定因素，中央财政还预留了充足的储备工具和政策空间。
And for more, we're joined by our Beijing correspondent Olivia Xiong. She's joining us from the media center where the news conference was held. Olivia, we keep saying this, so external uncertainties and also challenges, right, on the Chinese domestic economy front. But if we look at external tensions, trade tensions between China and the United States, any signs of that easing anytime soon?
Well, Wei Su, I think the message was quite clear in what was really a blockbuster news conference with all the top economic officials from China seated in the same room. I have to note that the news conference actually went on for close to 2.5 hours. But from the get-go, officials very keen to emphasize that they were confident in being able to hit its GDP growth target for this year of around 5%. You talked about the external pressures. There were repeated veiled references at this, particularly perhaps referring to the U.S. and that renewed trade war between the two superpowers, China recently announcing its countermeasures to the additional hike by the U.S. on Chinese goods. So what was also clear as well was that, the finance minister said that the central government has enough policy room to maneuver given the uncertainties with the new Trump administration. But then there was a direct response to a question that my colleague Tan Si-hui posed to the Commerce Minister, in which she asked whether this trade war, given if it would be prolonged, whether China would be concerned that it would hurt its long-term trajectory, and also asked how China would handle this in the past, handle this moving forward, rather. And the Commerce Minister said that while it is normal to have differences in economy and trade between two big countries, he called on the U.S. to act like a big country and find the right way to get along. He also added that he had actually written to his American counterpart saying that he was ready to have meetings and for their team to have discussions. But he said that in order to address each other's concerns, they needed to hold dialogue on, quote, equal footing, expressing hope that the two sides could work together. But despite what may seem to be like an olive branch, there was also this very strong warning from him. Have a listen.
中国的传统的交往之道是敬人者，人也敬之；不敬人者，当以其人之道还治其人之身。胁迫、要挟，对中国是行不通，也吓不倒中国。中方捍卫自身利益的决心是坚定不移的。针对美方采取的单边征税措施，已经根据国际法基本原则和法律法规，我们采取了必要的反制措施。刚才记者已经提到了，如果美方在错误的道路上越行越远，我们将奉陪到底。
In a separate question, though, the Commerce Minister did acknowledge that China's foreign trade was going to face serious challenges, but he did express confidence in being able to maintain stability. Now, this is key because last year, external demand came in stronger than expected and was able, in part, to help China meet its growth target of around 5% last year. But with external demand expected to soften, the Commerce Minister said that steps would be taken to ensure stability in foreign trade. He said that the government will look at more supportive policies, which will be rolled out when necessary, including supporting companies in securing orders and exploring alternative markets. He was also talking about expanding trade agreements and promoting inbound tourism, digital services, and supporting companies as it heads into uncharted waters. Wei Su.
Olivia, support in the face of declines in external demand could come in the shape of support for both boosting domestic consumption and advancing technology at home in China. What else did officials at the conference have to say on these issues?
That's right. Since yesterday, when the Chinese premier delivered the government work report, it was very clear that the government is keen to push two areas. What you mentioned, boosting domestic demand, especially consumption, and in the area of innovation in science and technology. At one point, there was a joke by the securities regulator, Wu Qing, who said that there were so many questions being answered related to tech that this started to sound like a tech conference. And we saw that, this buzz around China's innovation has sort of heated up again, and with the buzz surrounding its homegrown AI app DeepSeek. And we saw also that that this had led to questions about the effectiveness of America's export controls in terms of containing China's development in this area as the China-US tech race is expected to heat up. And this was referred to in this veiled swipe by a Chinese official.
我们欢迎国际投资者投资中国的科技企业，反对将市场化的投资行为公众化、政治化。 反对设置不正当的投资壁垒。
And so we saw all the different top officials and ministries pledging to support innovation in science and technology. The central bank governor noted that innovation activities are highly diverse, and from the supply side that there was a need to collaborate with the different agencies. He talked about introducing a science and technology segment on the bond market, expanding coverage of his relanding program, which was introduced last year. The securities regulator talked about developing an ecosystem to support innovation, adding that an IPO is not the only way for the capital market to support science and tech companies. Also adding that given that science and tech innovation is a process with many risks and uncertainties, he called for more understanding and tolerance for the listing of unprofitable companies. Wei Su.
Thanks, Olivia. Olivia, stay with us. Of course, joining us in this conversation, we have Tommy Xie. He's head of Asia Macro Research at OCBC Bank. He joins us from Singapore. Mr. Xie, picking up from all these reports that Olivia has brought us from Beijing, so we heard from China's Finance Minister Lan Fuan, also the PBOC head, the head of central bank. So from the finance minister, they intend to further expand fiscal spending. The PBOC head saying they are prepared to cut interest rates further, and rates at this point already at historic lows. Are we seeing fiscal and monetary policy combining their firepower to offset external headwinds?
Yes, I think this year it's very important. We're going to see more policy support. As mentioned by Olivia just now, I think last year the reason why the Chinese economy can really achieve around 5% is because of the support from the external demand. I mean, to be precise, actually, external demand last year contributed about 30% to China's growth. So that's the highest contribution since 1997. But for this year, I think the support from the external demand will likely to be much, much smaller. So from that angle, the gap needs to be filled. I think the fiscal policy or monetary policy will be the one to do the heavy lifting to support the growth, in particular in terms of how China can revive the domestic demand, including both consumption and investment. So that's where the fiscal policy is going to play a part. So other than that, China is also facing another challenge, which is the weak inflation growth. In fact, the CPI is only growing about 0.2% for the past 2 years. So how China can reflate the economy, that's also very important. So that's really where the monetary policy can play a part. That's why I think for this year, there's still the room, for China to cut the reserve requirement ratio as well as the interest rate, try to reflate the economy for this year.
Tommy, we saw many questions relating to China's science and technology innovation. We know that the authorities are pushing this as a key growth driver for the economy, and we saw all these agencies pledging support. But how well does this address some of the challenges that science and tech firms face now when it comes to innovation and the kind of ecosystem that authorities are talking about creating for it to be more supportive in spurring on more firms, perhaps to be like DeepSeek?
Yes, I mean, if you look at the recent successful example, whether being the DeepSeek or even like the movie Naja, so that tells us actually not everything can be planned. Right, so maybe what the authority can do is, number one, try to reduce the intervention in certain areas. But number two, as an authority, I guess what you can do is probably to provide more funding support. So that's something is possible, whether being the bond investment or whether being the equity investment. I think funding support could be very critical for the private sectors, in particular for the tech sectors. That's why I think going forward, we should expect more and more funding support, which may potentially create more and more deep sea moments. But in the end, I guess the technology sector is very important for China for this year because this is also contributing to a positive narrative shift we are seeing, right? So, I mean, for the past few years, we are seeing the narrative has been shifting from the China is uninvestable to tradable last year and now become the investable this year. That's really because of all those kind of the deep sea kind of the technology support. So I think, going forward, we should see more favorable environment for the overall development of the tech sectors in China.
But Tommy, we also know that even though there's more talk about supporting innovation and these firms in the science and tech sector, there was also a warning from Chinese officials and again by the Chinese premier yesterday delivering the government work report about guarding against 内卷 in Chinese, which essentially refers to involution or over-competition, which we have seen in the past, for example, in the electric vehicle sector where there was a bruising price war, smaller firms shutting down. How can this be prevented from repeating itself in the tech sector?
Right. I think maybe there's two angles we can think about that. I mean, the first angle is the reason we have the 内卷 is partially because of the imbalanced demand and the supply, right? So, I mean, you look at the past, in the past, the China's measures or stimulus measures is always focusing on the supply side, not much on the demand side. I think as long as there's imbalanced demand and supply, so I think we will always lead to some kind of the overcapacity problem, then eventually lead to this kind of the 内卷 problem. So if going forward, China can focus more on the demand side kind of the measures or supporting measures, so that may potentially could be one of the angle to correct this 内卷 problem. I think the other angle we can think about that, that's exactly the reason we have this private sector symposium last month between the President Xi and private sectors. So I think this symposium is not really simply show and tell, because I know there was a lot of focus on the deep sea, a lot of focus on Jack Ma, for example. But if you look at the people who attend the private sector symposium, there's also a lot of players from the renewable energy sectors, which is facing the challenge of the so-called 内卷, right? So I think with more and more this kind of a regular communication between the top leaders from the government sector and the private sector leaders, I think that's one of the way we can also try to, maybe to contain this kind of 内卷. So I think those are the two ways. Number one is whether China is able to come out more demand side measures. Number two is more dialogue between the government and the private sector. So that's the way we can solve the 内卷 problem.
Oh, thanks. Tommy Xie, head of Asia Macro Research at OCBC Bank in Singapore, and CNA's Olivia Xiong in Beijing. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, Chinese equities rally on Beijing's reassurances that it has plenty of room to act in the face of uncertainty and risks. And later, TSMC's chief hails a, quote, historical moment for US-Taiwan relations. CNA's Victoria Jen reports on the semiconductor announcement from Taipei. And Roland Lim is here with the latest business updates. Roland, in response to President Donald Trump's tariff tactics, Taiwan's government giving a nod to TSMC's $100 billion investment in the United States.
You're right, Wei Su. But the CEO of the world's largest contract chipmaker denies making the decision under any pressure. Taiwanese President William Lai hailed TSMC's plans to invest a fresh $100 billion into the U.S., and that's on top of the $65 billion the chipmaker committed earlier. But TSMC chairman and CEO C.C. Wei says that the U.S. investment will not affect the company's plans for Taiwan, where it'll build 11 more production lines. The move to build more facilities in the U.S. comes amid threats from U.S. President Trump to impose tariffs on semiconductor imports. TSMC is a key manufacturing partner to the likes of NVIDIA, Qualcomm, as well as Advanced Micro Devices, all American firms. Analysts say moving some of its production to U.S. soil could help solve a major supply chain risk for these fabs. And for more on the developments, we have CNA's Victoria Jen joining us live from Taipei. Victoria, good to have you on the show. Now, TSMC just held a joint press conference at Taiwan's presidential office just an hour ago. What more can you tell us?
Well, the joint press conference is basically aimed at appeasing the public concern about the U.S. hollowing out Taiwan's core technology and semiconductor. So basically, both leaders, President William Lai and TSMC CEO C.C. Wei, they want to reassure the public that TSMC is going to maintain its core production as well as core technology in Taiwan. And William Lai has stressed that there is no pressure from the United States on the latest decision. And also he said this is a proud moment, not just for TSMC, but for Taiwan as well, because it's only going to solidify TSMC's global position in the global supply chain, and it also put Taiwan back on the world map. Now, as far as C.C. Wei is concerned, he said that the main reason for this investment is to meet the customers' demand, just like TSMC has made investment in Japan, Germany, and also U.S., Arizona. So basically, this is not going to affect Taiwan's investment in for TSMC. And in fact, TSMC is already in its full capacity for this year as well as next year. So there's only going to be more need to make more investment in the future.
Victoria, these investments in the U.S. also mean that there's the risks of steeper cost increases. We all know that the U.S. is a higher cost center. So how then are these new investments in TSMC's and Taiwan's longer-term interests?
You're right. The cost of making chips in the U.S. is going to be 2 to 3 times higher than in Taiwan. So analysts are saying, even though the president has denied there's any pressure, but analysts are saying that this is clearly pressure from the U.S. Because Trump has threatened to impose 25% tariff on Taiwanese chips. And also he accused Taiwan of stealing the chips business from the U.S. And so in order to appease Trump's ire, this is basically aimed at that's why the TSMC is doubling down on its investment. And some analysts actually speculate that this is a strategy used by the TSMC to buy itself more time. Now, remember, it takes years to build these fabrication plants. And in fact, the construction of fabrication plants in the U.S. was delayed due to the lack of infrastructure and also local talents. So this is likely to happen again in the latest investment. Will Trump still be in the office by then? And also, will TSMC continue with these investments or scrap those investments? These are questions that could change the course of these investments in the future.
We shall see. Thank you, Victoria, for those insights. Victoria Jen reporting to us live from Taipei. A feeling of flourish in Greater China markets today as investors felt assured from Beijing's new policy support and after the country set an ambitious growth target for 2025, despite higher U.S. tariffs. Consumer and tech stocks leading the gains on the mainland. The Shanghai Composite ending the day 1.2% higher. Second was the Shenzhen component up by 1.8%. Blue chip CSI 300 closing 1.4 in the green. China's top economic officials said they have carved out plenty of room to deal with higher U.S. tariffs and that the country will study and roll out new policies in a timely manner. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index is at a 3-year high, and the Hang Seng Tech Index, well, it's rallied more than 5%, with market heavyweights Alibaba surging more than 8%, Tencent advancing around 7.6%. A Morgan Stanley economist says that though the fiscal stimulus package announced is moderate, the National People's Congress message of focusing on tech innovation and consumption is encouraging and should help to sustain the market's momentum. In the latest twist in a saga that began last year, the Japanese owner of 7-Eleven has announced a flurry of measures to fend off a Canadian rival's takeover bid and to engineer a recovery. Now, these include a share buyback plan, a leadership change, naming the first non-Japanese to head the firm, and listing its U.S. convenience store business. The U.S. share sale is expected to bring in about $6.7 billion for the company to be used for expansion. It will buy back $13.4 billion of shares by 2030, and that's one of the largest buybacks in the history of corporate Japan. The US-based subsidiary operates around some 13,000 convenience stores in the country and accounts for 70% of 7&I's holdings revenue. But a decline in consumer spending and petrol sales have affected its growth. The measures announced today are its most far-reaching since a $47 billion takeover bid by Canadian rival Alimentation Couche-Tard. Shares of the company is up 6% at the closing bell, just days after it plunged following reports that it plans to reject that $47 billion takeover bid by Canadian rival Couche-Tard. And that is the latest in business. Rui Su, back to you.
Oh, thank you, Roland. We're still ahead on East Asia tonight. South Korea and the United States will begin joint military exercises next week. But there may be some changes on the field after a jet accidentally bombed a village today. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Uncertainties abroad and doubts about demand at home. But confidence still on that an official target for growth can be reached. Oh, that's the message from China's top economic officials as they meet in Beijing. China repatriated a second wave of nationals from Myanmar scam centers via Thailand. This follows a crackdown that began in February and led to the extraction of more than 7,000 foreigners. And South Korea's military is investigating why 2 of its jets accidentally dropped bombs in a civilian district, injuring several people and damaging homes and a church. Let's stay on that story. At least 15 people have been injured in the incident in which 8 bombs were dropped outside of a designated area. The explosive landed in a village in the northern city of Pocheon, 40 kilometers away from capital Seoul, a near heavily militarized border with North Korea. Several buildings, including a church, were affected. Footage showed houses with debris strewn across the floor. Some 50 residents have been evacuated. The Air Force has halted live fire drills. It has expressed regret and says it's carrying out investigations. Residents in the area have for years now protested about the disturbance and potential dangers from nearby training grounds. Following today's incident, they say, quote, the unthinkable has happened, ramping up calls for authorities to act now.
민간 지역에 포탄이 떨어진 사건은 공군의 훈련 관리 및 안전 절차가 심각하게 미비했음을 여실히 보여주는 사고로 이에 대한 책임을 엄중히 묻지 않을 수 없다.
더 이상 민간인 피해가 발생하지 않도록 확실한 재발 방지 대책을 마련해 줄 것을 요구합니다.
South Korea and the United States will begin their annual Freedom Shield military exercise next week to bolster defense capabilities against North Korea. But after this mistaken release of bombs in a civilian area, authorities are said to be in talks on changing on-field exercises. This is one of 2 major annual drills, training troops to perform in a possible all-out war scenario. Drills are set to run from March the 10th to 20th and will include computer-simulated command training and field exercises. They aim to strengthen modern warfare capabilities across land, sea, air, cyber, and space. This marks the first such exercise since U.S. President Donald Trump returned to the White House, with the announcement coming just days after North Korea's latest threats against what it calls U.S.-led aggression.
By reflecting realistic threats, lessons learned from recent armed conflicts, and evolving challenges such as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea's military strategy, tactics, capabilities, as well as its growing partnership with Russia, the ROK-US alliance will further strengthen its readiness, capabilities, and combined defense posture.
Pyongyang has long condemned these drills, calling them rehearsals for invasion. Observers say it could respond with weapons tests such as missile launches. North Korea has also voiced strong opposition to the deployment of U.S. military hardware in South Korea. Both Washington and Seoul maintain exercises are purely defensive in nature. China has repatriated a second batch of nationals rescued from scam centers in Myanmar. This follows a recent multinational crackdown on fraud syndicates, which left more than 7,000 victims from around the world stranded in Myanmar. Thai officials say Chinese nationals were transported from Myanmar to Thailand by bus today. They were processed and put on the Immigration Bureau's blacklist before being transferred to an airport for a flight home. China, Thailand, and Myanmar have been working together to dismantle cross-border scam operations, which authorities say are part of a wider criminal network spanning Southeast Asia that has trafficked thousands into forced labor. The U.S. has announced indictments as well as new measures against alleged Chinese hacking and spying. U.S. federal officials have indicted 12 Chinese nationals, accusing them of collaborating to steal data from their targets. These include the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency and the U.S. Department of Commerce, as well as foreign ministries from Taiwan, South Korea, and India. 8 of them worked for Anxun Information Technology, that's a cybersecurity firm better known as iSoon, while 2 worked for the Chinese Ministry of Public Security. The U.S. indictment described iSoon as a key player in what it called China's hacker-for-hire ecosystem. At the same time, the U.S. Treasury announced that it was sanctioning Shanghai Heiying Information Technology Company and its owner, Zhou Shuai. It issued a statement accusing the Shanghai-based firm and Zhou of the alleged theft and sale of data from highly sensitive U.S. critical infrastructure networks. The department says some of the data was later acquired by another previously sanctioned Chinese hacker. The Chinese embassy in Washington, in response, says it opposes the sanctions and what it describes as long-arm jurisdiction against Chinese entities and individuals. It stressed that Beijing will take necessary measures to safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of its firms and nationals. A Hong Kong court has quashed and thrown out the convictions of 3 anti-government activists. It was a unanimous decision by 5 justices. The 3 activists, as Chow Hang Tung, Tang Ngok Kwan, and Sui Hon Kwong, were part of the now disbanded Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic democratic movements of China. They had previously organized an animal vigil in Hong Kong to commemorate the 1989 Tiananmen Square incident. The prosecution had accused them of being a foreign agent having links to pro-democracy groups overseas. But the group has rejected that accusation. The 3 activists were convicted and sentenced to jail in 2023 because they had refused then to provide information to police. They were sentenced to 4.5 months in prison, and they have already served time. The Court of Final Appeal, in its judgment, said the prosecution had failed to prove that the alliance was in fact, quote, a foreign agent. Our leaders of the European Union are holding emergency talks in Brussels with the aim of endorsing measures to boost defense spending and pledge their support for Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is also present at this summit. This urgent meeting follows Washington's suspension of military aid and intelligence to Kyiv, raising questions about how much the bloc can rely on U.S. support in the future. It remains unclear if a final text on Ukraine will be endorsed by the European Union due to a veto threat from Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has maintained friendly ties with the Kremlin. And still on East Asia tonight, scientists sound the alarm on sea ice. Rising temperatures have pushed global sea ice cover to an historic low. Details in just a moment. Logistics group DHL has announced results for the final quarter of 2024, with operating profit down 7%. The company is planning to cut 8,000 jobs in Germany this year. Earlier, my colleague Roland Lim spoke with CEO Tobias Meyer about the company's results and the outlook for this year, given uncertainties in global trade because of tariffs initiated by the new administration in the United States.
With the evolving relationship between the US and China, how do you foresee these geopolitical dynamics actually affecting demand patterns when it comes to DHL's services?
So, firstly, we have a great advantage in our footprint. We are really present in many markets that are not so affected by this turmoil. We are very strong in Asia. Nobody knows Asia as we do, is a claim that we often used. But also in the Middle East and Africa, these are really our strongholds. Now, the trade with the US is obviously important for us as well. It's a quarter, roughly, of global trade that goes in or out of the US. So it does matter, but we still have 3/4 also strong intra-Asian trade that we aim to participate in. And that's something that we really focus on, that we have intensive discussions with our customers, how we can enhance our services in those areas that are growing.
And speaking of Asia, you've also been relocating Chinese staff to better serve Chinese customers abroad. That's implementing a China Plus One diversification strategy. But now that Trump plans to match tariff for tariff in any particular country, are your clients changing tack?
Well, we have seen the shift of manufacturing, especially, you know that, Vietnam playing a bigger role in electronics, for instance. And we do see that Chinese companies internationalize as European companies have 50, 60 years ago. And that's something that I think generally is positive. And we want to be part of that. We want to help those customers internationalize their distribution footprint, but also their manufacturing footprint, to set up new plants in Europe, for instance, when it comes to electric vehicles. So that's why we really focus on those customers and obviously try to provide a good service also by having local language capabilities, as we had in the past for other trade lanes out of Japan, out of Europe especially.
The ripple effects of increased protectionism could very well reduce international trade. What's your base case prediction for freight rates into 2025 this year?
Very difficult to say, Roland. First of all, I think it's regrettable to have hurdles to trade. Trade has not only helped nations develop, it also helps us all to participate in technological progress. Think about the vaccines that we were allowed to distribute across the planet. Think about other advances in medical devices, for instance. And not all nations, not all countries will be able to build such devices, so they need to be traded. And it's regrettable that hurdles are put up. It's not to the benefit of the people. But we need to cope with that. And for us, it's a bit of a dual message. On the one hand side, yes, volume goes down. China-US trade is such an example that hasn't grown in the last 5 years, but rather shrunk. But for us, it often means more work. If you think about the abolishment of the de minimis, for instance, that means many, many millions of more customs filings, and that's activity that we obviously support our customers with. As it relates to freight rates, I think it will depend a lot on China outbound e-commerce that has a notable impact on the global air freight market. A lot of particularly full freighter capacity is tied up in that type of trade. And as it relates to ocean freight, we have still the Red Sea issue. It's very clear if the Red Sea would reopen, we would obviously save quite a bit of traveling time on the Asia-Europe loops, and that would free up additional capacity with impact on rates. So I think these are the main two factors that we are watching. Hard to predict how it will play out.
Is capacity still tight, though, when it comes to the slots on vessels leaving China? I mean, given the situation in the Red Sea.
Well, I think it It is tight, especially also due to landside infrastructure. That's an increasing issue again, not only in China, more so in European markets and in North America. So that's something we need to keep in mind. This system has different type of bottlenecks. It's not only the capacity of the vessels itself, it's the availability of boxes, it's the port capacity, it's the hinterland capacity to get those boxes out and in of the ports. So that's what the chain consists of, and we do expect further bottlenecks arising as trade evolves.
Is it less bumpy for air cargo? What's the outlook there?
Well, it very much depends, as I mentioned, on how China e-commerce will be handled. We are a strong believer that the drive, the need, the wish of consumers to order online, that is very much intact. So it's not a question of the last mile that the package is dropped at the door, but it is a question where that package is packed and how it is transported. Is it packed in China originally, or will China merchants also set up shop in the US to do fulfillment activity? That will have a severe impact on air freight capacity becoming available. So we have to see how that plays out. It very much hinges on the de minimis question in the US. If that would go away, I think you would see a significant shift to more localized inventory.
Thank you, Tobias. That was Tobias Meyer, CEO of DHL, speaking to us on his analysis of the international logistics market.
The world's biggest mobile technology event is underway in Spain. This year, Chinese tech giants are making waves with new smartphones, one targeting the high-end market, the other focusing on affordability.
Packed crowds are gathering at Mobile World Congress in Spain to see the latest in mobile technology. Chinese brands Xiaomi and TCL are making their mark, launching new smartphones. Xiaomi is unveiling its latest flagship models, the Xiaomi 15 and Xiaomi 15 Ultra.
On Xiaomi 15, what we've done is physically we've refined the design, so we've got a much more integrated design both on the back, around the camera, and then with our LiPo technology, we've managed to get bezels all around the screen in a symmetrical manner that are going to be much smaller.
The Xiaomi 15 Ultra boasts a larger display and a 200-megapixel periscope zoom camera. But competition in the high-end smartphone market is fierce.
I mean, Xiaomi, they're good products, absolutely, very strong. It's logical that they take those out to China. But the high end of the smartphone market is incredibly competitive now. I mean, you've got Samsung, you've got Oppo, you've got Honor, you've got Xiaomi, a number of others, Google themselves. I think differentiating in that premium tier is going to be very, very difficult for all of those players, but particularly Xiaomi.
While Xiaomi targets the premium segment, TCL is focusing on the affordable market. It is launching 6 new models in the TCL 60 series, including the TCL 60 SE NXT Paper 5G. The phone features a 6.7-inch display and AI-powered tools. But TCL's standout feature is an eye-friendly NXT Paper mode, which transforms the screen into a black and white e-reader.
Most importantly is that we make this phone a combination of a smartphone and an e-ink or e-reader devices 2-in-1. You can see a Nest Paper key, we call it here, and once you switch it on, it can transit the phone from a regular full-color smartphone into a black and white e-ink-like devices.
TCL is also making a bold move in 5G affordability. The TCL K32 5G, priced at just $99, brings satellite communication technology to the entry-level market. Analysts say demand for budget smartphones is growing.
Now, we hear a huge amount about the iPhone and phones costing north of $1,000. What we've seen in the mobile market is really a polarization. So consumers are either trading up and spending a lot, and in some markets might have the benefit of subsidy, or they're moving down towards the lower end of the market at sub 200 euros. So that's a huge, huge market, massive opportunity.
That means the mid-tier market has really been squeezed as consumers go to either end.
Relief as wet weather appears to have stopped the spread of Japan's worst wildfire in more than 50 years. Although officials say they did have visual confirmation that the burnt area had not expanded, they warn it's too early to say for certain if the fire had in fact stopped growing. The blaze had raged around the northern city of Ofunato for more than a week, killing one person and forcing more than 4,500 residents to evacuate their homes. The inferno scorched nearly 3,000 hectares of land. That's around a tenth of the city's total area. According to the fire agency, at least 78 buildings are believed to have been damaged, although details are still being assessed. Europe's climate monitor says the extent of sea ice stretching across the polar regions reached an historic low in February. It comes as the world continues to see a persistent heat streak following a spike in greenhouse gas emissions. The Copernicus Climate Change Service reporting that the daily global sea ice cover, which combines the amount of sea ice present in the Arctic and Antarctic, hit a minimum of 16.04 million square kilometers. The Antarctic sea ice in particular was 26% below average last month. Temperatures also particularly high north of the Arctic Circle, peaking at 11 degrees Celsius, beating pre-industrial records. Climate experts warn the shrinking level of sea ice has serious consequences locally and globally, especially for native communities and wildlife who depend on them for survival. The lower ice coverage, however, is seen as a boon for Arctic countries such as Russia, as well as China, which positions itself as a so-called near-Arctic state. The melting ice could open up shortcuts through previously blocked passages, granting faster access from East Asia to parts of Europe. A new route also provides an alternative to traditional passages such as the Suez Canal, where shipping has been hit by hostilities due to the Israel-Hamas war. Now, some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. Yonhap News Agency says K-pop girl group New Jeans agency Adore has filed a complaint seeking to ban the group's musical activities. This marks the latest in an ongoing dispute between the agency and the group, which rebranded as NJZ last month. NJS accuses the agency of trying to suppress their professional freedom. Japan Times says that pastimes long associated with grandparents are booming on social media. It noted greater demand by young people for more traditional hobbies, with a yarn manufacturer even warning customers of a possible shortage. And lastly, Nikkei Asia reports that Japan's anime industry has been wrestling with an exodus of animators. The paper says that's happening despite pay rises of 80% over 10 years. According to the paper, low-paid animators have been moving to video games or freelance work instead of relying on commissions based on each animation frame that they work on. Some studios have responded by raising pay and hiring staff on fixed salaries. And that's East Asia Tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia, plus on Facebook and YouTube.